So a very, very good morning to all of you, and we are very, very lucky to have with us Professor Vikas Rawal, who needs very little introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. Apart from being for the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and an expert in developmental economics, agricultural economics, and what he calls applied econometrics. But I think what we are really going to be talking about today is the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown. We've assumed the lockdown to have been a necessity, and I think only recently, with the plight of migrant workers, has the not just the sagacity and the wisdom, but the completely unplannedness in which the lockdown was called and carried out, callousness, in fact, coming to light. So today's discussion is lockdown impact, disrupted harvest, lost jobs, and hunger, especially in rural India. Now, a very important study that has come before us is like a monograph, which I would recommend everybody thinking Indian should read, is from the Society for Social and Economic Research, SSER, where there's Vikas Rawal, there's Manish Kumar, Ankur Verma, and Jessica Pace have together done this study. And it raises very, very serious issues on the impact on the farmers, rural economy in general, and of course, hunger. So these are some of the areas that we will deal with. So Professor Rawal, before we get to the decoding of your very, very substantive monograph, I would just like to ask what immediately needs to be done? I mean, what would your recommendations be? 1, 2, 3, 4 for small middle farmers, for all farmers, for landless laborer, rural worker, Manrega, for mandis, agricultural markets, for the restoration of the supply chain, especially pesticides, etc., as you pointed out in your report, for hunger alleviation, given the grains that the FCI has. These are just some pointers I had from your own work. What immediately needs to be done before we get to decoding your report?
If we are talking about the immediate things that need to be done immediately, I can think of 3 things that I think are the most important, should be done right away. One is distribution of public stocks. You just need to expand public distribution, just do a universal entitlement until this whole crisis is over. You just have to say that everybody is entitled to 10 kilos of grain a month or whatever, but that entitlement is not subject to your having a ration card or Aadhaar card or nothing. Anybody who goes to a ration shop and demands to get wheat or rice or pulses should be given the grain. So that's number one. Giving out food grain, you see, that's in a sense the most one positive thing that one could say about Indian economy, that we were sitting on a large stock of food grain. You see, so leveraging that is the most important, most eminently feasible thing that should be done immediately. There's no two way about it.
You refer to strategically using that grain. You refer to that.
Right. The second is immediately expanding the ambit of the rural employment guarantee scheme. Using that to put money in the hands of the people. And there I would say 2 things. One, that the guarantee scheme has a provision for payment of unemployment allowance. You had 2 months when the entire population of NREGA workers, the job card holders, were out of work.
7.3 crore registered, I think. Yeah?
Were out of work because you could not provide them work. You suddenly announced a lockdown. They had no time to apply for work. If you make an application a mandatory hours, they had no time to.
Can you just apply. Repeat that sentence? There was a slight drop in the connection.
You see, the point is that the NREGA has a provision for payment of unemployment allowance. There is a requirement for making an application. You see, but workers could not apply because you announced the lockdown with a notice of 4 hours. So, you have to just do away with all those restrictions. And for the entire period during which, because of lockdown, NREGA workers were unable to work, you have to give them unemployment allowance. And you have to then think of expanding the work under NREGA for rest of the year, so that a larger number of people are able to work through NREGA. That's number 2. Number three would be to compensate farmers for the losses they have incurred because of complete disruption of uh, harvesting for a whole lot of crops, but even more importantly, disruption of agricultural marketing for over a month. The costs that were associated with it, the crop losses that happened because of it, all of that would have to be compensated. So these are the three things which I think should be on the sort of top of the agenda insofar as dealing with the rural crisis.
Do you see that happening, in the sense, before I get to the report again, given the fact that you've actually, as you mentioned in your own report, you actually see the government trying to say that we'll use this opportunity to deregulate APMCs and bring in corporates into the agriculture sector. You see, quote unquote, land acquisition laws being again, all the statutory requirements which corporates had to undergo so that rapacious land acquisition did not happen. Uttar Pradesh has said that it will remove it. Many other states are going to go the same way. So quite apart, instead of alleviating the distress and the mistakes of the last 2.5, 3 months, it looks as if the government is exacerbating them.
I think there are two sides to it. You see, one is you know, your first question. Yes, well, I don't see this happening. I don't think the government is, you know, sort of trying to do any of this. But there are two sides to this. One is a denial of distress. You see, you're not willing to accept that there is distress. You have, you know, every news channel, barring, you know, obviously the ones, the Godi media, as it is called, have shown images of the crisis of migrant workers, of, you know, the crisis of livelihood. NGOs have been running community kitchens, something that even government has acknowledged, by the way. Government offered to sell them at market prices grain to run community kitchens.
Even CJP bought grain from FCI.
Right. So the fact that there is that crisis is known but not acknowledged. So the government is in a denial mode insofar as the crisis is concerned, and that is one aspect of this. The second is more sinister, where, you know, you are not just denying that there is a crisis, you are actually using it as an opportunity to do things that you could not do in normal times. You see, all these things that the government is now trying to do, whether it's APMC reforms, whether it is, you know, reform of Tenancy Act, whether it's, you know, getting rid of ECA, these are things that have been in the air. You know, they've been talking about this. They have not been able to do it. But what is sinister is that, you know, you actually think that this is your moment when people are all locked up. There is no the resistance is muted. The opportunity, the possibility for people to speak up is circumscribed, and you can use this moment to now test the waters, to try out these reforms. You know, that's the sinister part of it, that you're trying to do things that you would not be able to do otherwise. And not only you are trying to do it this way, you're actually saying it also.
Yeah.
So, you know, which is what makes it the worst, you know, which is really the worst. You know, the Niti Aayog CEO, Amitabh Kant, actually wrote, you will not get another opportunity like this. This is the opportunity to seize.
Yeah.
You see, you have one after another spokespersons of the government who actually even expressed it this way, that, you know, this is the opportunity to seize. No, that is the sinister side of it. Yeah. But you see, the point is that the hypocrisy of this is another thing that needs to be called out. You know, you are saying that APMC reforms are being done to give choices to farmers. APMC reforms are being done to give choices to traders and big business. You see, the ECA is being done not to give choices to consumers. ECA is being amended to give choices to big wholesalers to hold food commodity. You see, so you are doing these things not because you are giving choices to consumers or to farmers. You are doing this because you are giving choices to your corporate masters. That's quite clear.
the report that you have all brought out, this monograph, speaks in detail and also highlights the whole issue of the disruption agricultural harvest. And this is very little known in urban India, though some of us have been tracking it sort of episodically as journalists. Like we found when our team was working in Assam, for instance, we found a reflection on what you had said in your India's villages under COVID, because we found tracks of district of Assam which do the traditional Nimbu and Kakadi and Bengan and Tomato had to even feed them to cattle because there was no supply chain available for the horticulturists. Even the dairy issue came up in parts of the Barak Valley, etc. So would you speak to us a little bit about the disruption in harvest that Indian farmers have gone through and how that happened and how it could have been avoided?
So you see, there are two things. One is that there's no planning, there's no preparation. You didn't think of this, that harvest was happening. In some places it was about to happen and so on. And that there is this whole diversity of both agroclimatic context and crops that farmers grow. There are different kinds of requirements. You had made no preparation for it. You had made no plans for it. The second thing is that when the lockdown happened, the first few weeks, it was the most ruthless regime. You had cops who were just beating up people left, right, and center wherever they could, indiscriminately, not allowing people to come out, not allowing people to assemble. Now, you see, harvesting is a task which, the entire series of things that have to be done, harvest and post-harvest, are tasks that require people to assemble. 10 people have to work together to do the harvesting. Then threshing has to happen like that. In Haryana, Punjab, for example, you get a threshing machine. Overnight threshing happens. It's very hot summer. So people do typically thresh their grain at night. So at night, the 15 people will assemble and the threshing would happen. Now, loading, unloading, these are all tasks for which substantial labor mobilization has to happen. But you had this absolutely ruthless lockdown regime in the first few weeks in particular, where you had the first few weeks a situation where harvesting was disrupted, where people were not even allowed to harvest. The second aspect of this was not allowing people to sell, not allowing people to take their produce to the market.
Right.
That is something that went on for much longer. The mandis opened pretty much towards the end of the second phase of lockdown. So you had a fairly long period where barring, a few mandis dealing primarily with the most perishable commodity.
Right.
Where there was also some demand and some sort of urgency to deal with it. A little bit of that was being sold. Other than that, you basically just shut the mandis down.
Yeah.
We did that calculation, in the first phase of lockdown, if you compare it with the amount of sales last year, only 6% of wheat was sold. Right. And I think chana was only about 4%. And mustard was also about like that. So hardly any sales happened. Now,
and you're having a very good harvest, a very good harvest.
Farmers were sitting on this grain. And you see, if farmers are not able to sell, it results in all kinds of problems. One is that you also had over this period several spells of hailstorms, rain. In 59% of the geographical area of the country, there was
about 59% of geographical area of the country had more than 60% excess rainfall.
My God. Yeah.
So you had a very large part of the area where there was just too much rain, there was hailstorms and all of that, which meant that the grain that was ready to be harvested, grain that was already harvested was exposed, and farmers don't have, covered storage facilities to keep their grain for weeks on. So you had higher losses because this grain was exposed. You also had another problem. You see, you were not able to sell your produce for a month or sometimes 2 months.
To store it.
You had to store it. But that also meant that your interest burden, you were unable to repay your loans.
Yeah.
So the interest burden piles up. You had to invest in first taking the grain to your house or to your cattle shed or wherever you could possibly store it. get it offloaded there. Then when it was time to take it to the mandi, get it loaded again onto tractor trolleys, take it again. All of this means additional labor cost. You see, so the cost of production has gone up, losses have gone up because of all of this. You see, farmers had to incur additional costs to get all this done. Now, all of this basically means that farmers' costs have risen, their losses have increased, and they have to be compensated. Now, you see, what is terrible is that on 15th of May, when the finance minister was announcing a relief package, she talked about 6,400 crore rupees having been given by insurance companies through the PM Fasal Bima Yojana. Now, this is just, utterly dishonest, I would say, and that there's no other word for it. All these claims are pending claims of the past seasons. Nobody has been compensated for losses of this season. So to put this as compensation and relief for what is going on now is really a travesty. The second thing is that under PM Kisan, if you look at the structure of premium, of the total premium, anything between 50 to 80% of premium is paid by farmers. This is money that farmers have paid. To call this as relief by government is utterly dishonest. Farmers have paid for this. This government has shifted the agricultural insurance scheme to a scheme which is run by private insurance companies, in which payment is primarily paid by farmers. The rest of it is divided equally between state and central governments, but the lion's share of it is farmers' payment. So, to call this as compensation and relief given by central government is really a travesty.
You also mentioned, and in the agricultural sector, there was this huge problem, particularly about perishables, apart from wheat and chana, mustard and paddy. The perishables and also about milk is a very sharp observations in your report. And I think maybe the only honest thing the finance minister says when she was talking about milk being thrown on the streets or whatever.
Yeah, she herself said it. She announced that there was a decline of 20 to 25% decline in the demand for milk. The milk was being thrown on the streets is something that she acknowledged. Now, but then what does she do? She says that we procured, I think, 111 crore liter extra milk to support farmers. Again, a lie being parroted here. What is this 110 extra liters? You procure 560 liters of milk per day. How much did you procure prior to that? Prior to the lockdown? Roughly the same amount. Maybe a little bit less, but more or less in the same range. Okay, what you are saying is that the demand has fallen by 25%. So the sales of cooperatives have fallen. And that the produce that they are unable to sell, which they convert into skim milk powder or butter or ghee and store it, because that's what has shelf life, and we sell it later, is again relief being provided by government to farmers. Neither has the government given money to dairy cooperatives, nor have dairy cooperatives given any additional money to farmers. You see, it's the same amount of procurement that you used to do. Okay, your only sort of mercy. The small mercy is that cooperatives have not reduced the procurement that they used to do. We got some news initially that happened to some extent, but I suppose that was sort of taken care of, and it was ensured that they don't cut down on their procurement because there was a fall in demand. But they have not provided any additional relief. The prices of milk, and dairy cooperatives only buy a part of the total milk supply. The fact is that private dairies, informal milkmen, they also account for a bulk of milk sales, and all of that practically stopped. And villages after villages that we covered in our village studies series showed that milk was not being purchased. All the private dairies and informal milkmen who used to buy milk and supply them to the cities stopped doing so because there's no demand. People who lost their jobs, had no money to buy milk.
So, I mean, I think two dates in your report struck me very sharply when I read it a couple of times. One is March 27th and the other one is April 20th. And the reason why I mention is because the lockdown is suddenly called, like you said, at 4 hours notice. And then nothing has been thought of for the mandis till March 27th, when they're technically through a GR allowed to function again. And April 20th is when the notification for Manrega is put out, that Manrega work will not be stopped. But which also means, like you said, that for a whole month there was nothing happening or nothing was allowed to happen. So even after March 27th, when the mandis were supposedly allowed to start functioning again, whether it's the police, whether it's the administration, bad messaging, bad political intent, it just didn't happen. The mandis, as you show in your report, were not functioning.
Sure.
How did the mandi work? If you can just tell the viewer and the listener, and what is this non-functioning of the mandi actually meant to the farming sector?
You see, so the point is that the farmers take their produce to the APMC mandis, and in the mandis that grain is weighed, it is unloaded, it is put into bags, it is sometimes cleaned. There is that whole thing, and then there is this auctioning that happens, and then the grain is taken. Now, all of this starting from the village. You see, you have to load it into your tractor trolleys or bullock carts and so on, take it to the mandi, get into the mandi and then do that whole thing. Now, the point is that one is that when on March 27 you come out with a notification, that's a central government notification. By the time it reaches the states, there is already a week or 10 days that have passed. Then the whole process of it, you see, it requires labor. Now, one big problem, for example, was combine harvesters. You see, the combine harvesters are owned by people in Punjab. They go to Maharashtra, they go to Madhya Pradesh, and they start moving northwards because the harvesting starts in the central India early. And the Punjab is the last one to have the harvest. So they move northwards as the harvesting season progresses. But this time, they just couldn't reach Madhya Pradesh. They could never reach Madhya Pradesh. So how would harvesting happen in Madhya Pradesh? So a lot of it simply happened manually. It took much longer. It costed a lot more and so on. So even when you came out with that notification, for you to work out the institutional process through which combine harvesters will actually move took another 3 weeks. By then it was too late anyway for combine harvesters to go, because combine harvesters were then going to be needed in Punjab. So, things of this kind, putting these things in place, there was a lag. And you see, the thing is that you were not thinking ahead. You were thinking on the day when the problem came, you were confronted with the problem. So when you started, you said, oh, Punjab harvesting is still 15 days, there's still 15 days to go for it, so we don't have to worry. You started worrying about Punjab harvesting when Punjab harvesting was about to start.
Yeah.
Similarly, you didn't think of mango, because you said, okay, mango happens in whatever end of May or something in Maharashtra and then Gujarat, and it happens much later elsewhere. You didn't think of lychees in Bihar or something. You start thinking of it when the problem happens, and then you have no time to resolve it. So you see, that was another problem, that whoever was taking the decision, every day a new problem appearing.
Just have to repeat that there was a small gap. Yeah.
They were not thinking ahead of the problems that were going to happen. They were not planning, preparing for it. They were firefighting. Yeah. When you had a problem, you said, okay, now let's resolve it. But then before you can manage to resolve it, there's the next problem. Okay. So you see, that's how things were happening. Now, once they started to open the mandis, they said that they were going to allow something like 30 or 40 farmers a day into the mandi because of social distancing. Now, if that's the rate at which you're going to allow farmers into the mandis, how long will it take? So, you see, by the time it's only towards the end of the second phase of the lockdown that the number of mandis that were barely functional reached roughly the level of the last year.
Let's see, early May or something.
It basically took you about 2 phases of the lockdown to somewhat resume it. But you see, you had not thought of how you are going to resume. So as you resumed, you were confronted with another problem, that the diseases started spreading in the mandis. The mandis became the super spreaders. And mandis started closing down. So if you look at the graphs that we have in our reports, in the third phase, the number of functional mandis start falling again. And there is a fairly significant fall in the number of mandis functioning in this third phase, and that fall is much sharper than the last year. There's some decline that is natural because the harvesting season sort of starts coming to an end, but there's a very sharp fall, and it was clearly because the mandis were shutting down because they became the location where the disease started spreading. You see, and you are not planned for this.
Yeah.
You see, if you are unable to provide PPE kits to your doctors and nurses, where was the possibility of providing them to your commission agents and traders and farm workers or mandi workers in the mandis? There's no such equipment available. So that basically meant that you tried to get out of one problem in the mandis, you got into another. See, and again, it was basically because you're not planned, you're not prepared. There's no foresight.
Is it, I mean, this is a slightly off the beaten track question. In terms of a government facing a crisis of this kind, certainly doesn't help if you've got an autocratic outlook and if you have a majoritarian mindset. Because you need to have the help of scientists, economists, agriculturalists. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to listen to state governments. Maybe listen to states like Kerala a bit more than you want to because they have certain success possibilities. Maybe have an interstate council because states in our country are not used to talking to each other. So, I mean, they only talk to the center. So you have to have an interstate council so that people are kind of coming together to have conversations. So none of this happened. None of this was allowed to happen. It was almost as if 1 or 2 or 3 people were kind of giving diktats. And carrying this wonderful program forward till it all started falling apart.
In fact, you see, there are 2 things to it. And I think that the first one is very important, which is that why is it that you did not start doing all of what you just mentioned, having a high-level committee, having an empowered group of ministers or interstate body to deal with it, or, having experts on the job, etc., say in January? Why was it not done 2 months in advance? The whole world was dealing with this pandemic.
Yeah.
You see, and that is a question that must be asked. The accountability for this. Why is it that the preparation for this did not start 2 months ahead? Why is it that you did not put in place this entire sort of institutional setup to deal with the crisis that was imminently coming? You see, so that's very important. The second thing is that you not only did not do it 2 months in advance, you never did it.
Never did. Not even now.
Not even now. So you don't know who's taking the decisions. It's perhaps just a bunch of bureaucrats who are deciding, on a day-to-day basis what they're going to do, depending on whatever is the channel of information they have.
Correct.
But you just have not reached out to either experts or civil society or, political leaders or
stakeholders
or other stakeholders and said, okay, let's sit down together and figure out how to deal with this. You see, whatever the political views, everybody understands that there is a situation of crisis.
Correct.
And this is a moment where if you are asked, okay, tell me what should I do? I'm not going to say, I don't like you fellows and therefore I'm not going to advise you.
Yeah.
In the crisis, everybody would have risen to this and said, okay, let's come together and deal with it. But you would not do it.
Because you don't have that attitude of wanting to work together.
Yeah, you don't want to work with anybody. You obviously didn't think of this. So I think it's both this, the lack of doing it in advance, lack of having the foresight to prepare for it. And I think that's really a criminal act that has happened.
Yeah.
And it's something for which accountability must be held. On why is it that the government did not make preparations? And if they did, what did they do? In a white paper or something of that kind needs to be placed, which says what was government's preparedness for it.
678 lives at the very minimum lost. We are not even talking about chronic hunger and livelihood loss that we'll come to in a minute. That the kind of job loss and depression. I don't know, all sorts of things that people are facing. I think we should talk a little bit about the misleading statements of this government on the rural work program, MNREGA, because I think MNREGA is going to become very crucial in the days to come, even with all the failures of the past. And your report deals with it at some length. Particularly, I was struck by the fact that you had 2019-20, you had 27 1.3 crore registration of Manrega workers. But whereas actually only 9 crore something, that is only a third actually got the work for whatever reason the government gave. But that means only a third of people who are registered even last year, through the last year, got the work. So in this time of crisis, if there's going to be this bureaucratic bungling and this juggling as to who deserves it or who doesn't deserve it and why are they turned away, at a time when everybody needs the work and we need to expand the rural work program and the funding for it, what are the real steps that need to be taken?
Okay, let's first understand one thing about NREGA. And this is a problem that has always been there to some extent, even during the time that UPA was in power, but it has really become much worse now. Which is that this is a program that was designed as an employment guarantee program, which was going to be demand driven. That is, if a person demands work, then within 15 days, within 5 kilometers of person's normal place of residence, you were obliged to provide work. And if you could not do so, you would give the person unemployment allowance. Okay, that's the basic design of the scheme. Now, in reality, this scheme has never worked like that. This scheme has always been, like any other employment public works program, a supply-driven program. The work is organized. When the work is organized, workers are called and told, okay, now the work is available, you can work for it and you get paid for it. Many times even that doesn't happen. There are all kinds of corruption involved in this, but leave that aside. The point is that it has always been implemented actually as a supply-side program.
When it should not have been.
It should have been the reverse. And you've done that essentially by bureaucratizing hugely this whole system of demanding work. That this demand has to be given in written, it has to be submitted in a particular way, this, that, and so on. And if that has been done, that has not been done, then the worker has not demanded, and therefore you have no obligation to provide work. But it now turns out that even if you take that, there are actually a lot of people who are demanding work. So what is being now shown is that the work is offered to them, but they don't do it, and therefore the work is not done. So you see, you are actually doing the next level of fudging, where you're basically saying the work is demanded, we offer the work, but nobody does the work. People are not willing to work, and therefore the work is not being done. So you see, I think there is a serious problem in the way NREGA is being implemented. It is it has been bureaucratized. It is not being implemented in the spirit of the act. Therefore, you have a certain allocation of money, you have a certain projection that so much work will be generated in each place in a particular month, and you basically just do that much. Okay. Now, during this period, you in fact did not even do that.
No.
So you had a certain projection for April, you did not meet even those projections. No. In a situation where there's such a massive crisis of employment and livelihoods, you just did not, create even the employment that you had projected you would create.
12% of it or something.
Yeah. So that's the situation. Now again, just like the food stocks, as I was saying, is grain lying with you, you could use it. NREGA would have been the lifeline, in a situation where you had, even if one takes the argument that this kind of lockdown was necessary, if you had something like this, the
allowance would have been paid. And
NREGA work could have been organized. That could have been used as your palliative in a situation such as this. But you did not do it. So
and
that's.
Then it comes to the allocation from the finance minister when she sort of talks about, I think, a 90,000 crore increase, maybe.
40,000.
40,000. A total is 90,000. Yeah.
Total is 90,000.
Yeah.
Which is actually not at all sufficient.
Yeah, and you projected a much larger figure.
Well, we've said 2.25 lakh crores.
Yeah.
Instead of 90,000 crores that is available. If you were to provide, there are 8 point some crore active workers, and let's say another 1 crore workers, so 9.5 crore workers. If you had to provide employment for 100 days to so many workers, even just for this, I'm not talking of all the NREGA workers who are registered.
Because
Even
actually your yes, workers are much higher, much.
your workers are much higher. Your actually registered workers are much higher. But even if you take active workers and say, okay, let's add a lakh to it, and there's already a large number of, I forgot, I think the number we last time was something like 14 lakh applications for new job cards during the lockdown. During the period of lockdown, there's been, as per the ministry data, you have something like 14 lakh new applications for job cards. So there is a huge demand for work, and you're not able to provide it. Now, the fact that, in fact, the question needs to be asked, if as per your records, you are providing work and people are not taking it in a time of this crisis, what is wrong? You have to explain it.
Yes. There has to be some reason for that.
There has to be some reason for it. Why is it that you are not informing them on time? What's wrong with you? That the work
is not exercise, or is it a paper
exercise? It's the bureaucracy which is coming in the way.
The unemployment stress is going to be the other huge problem, which is already being projected by CMIE, and said 30% of India was productive in that period of the lockdown, which means 70% of the normal persons who work were not working. We had the whole problem of the large amounts of food grain in FCI go downs, which are not being disbursed despite hunger. So there's unemployment stress, there is this food grain, this thing, and I'm just asking now a political question that state governments are worried because state governments have not got their share from GST and for a lot of funding issues. How much of all this is to blame can we lay at the state government's door? Because it seems to me that the state governments are almost fearful of criticizing the central government openly, because then their share would get cut even further, because this government, unlike other governments, sort of plays with the packages it gives governments. It never gave Kerala enough during the floods. We all know that. So, I mean, how does one look at this in terms of the federal structure, that you have so much being decided by the center, despite many items being on the concurrent list? And politically, the states are also going to take the blame, as they need to take the blame because they are governing these states and provinces. I've lost your voice. I can't hear you. No, I think I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. So there are two things. You see, let's first take the specific question of how much is the fault of the states. You see, and I would say that the primary responsibility in this case lies on the center. Whether the states could have coped with it on their own, well, Kerala is an example where the state actually tried to cope with the the fact that the central government was not doing what it should have done. Okay, but leave that aside. I think the fact that there's no preparedness for it, the primary burden of the responsibility for it lies on the central government. Okay, that's number one. Whether the states could have done some preparation, etc., maybe yes, but the primary responsibility for this lies clearly on the center, and it is the center which has the convening power also. If any interstate collaboration has to happen, anything has to happen at the national level. The second thing is that that when central government takes decisions which are taken at short notice, suddenly announced, the finance minister or the prime minister or somebody like that comes on TV at 8 o'clock and makes an announcement. You see, you then can't blame the center for not promptly seizing the state for seizing that offer. So, for example, under Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, you said that we will double everybody's entitlement of grain. But in the month of April, while NFSA distribution was something like 43 lakh crores, the
National Food Security Act. Yeah.
National Food Security Act allocation was something like 43 lakh crores. The allocation under Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana was only 26 or 29 lakh crores. So it was far short of double. Now you could argue that we announced the states were supposed to do the offtake and distribute. Come on, I mean They did it today, and they said, okay, so tomorrow you start doing it. Now, it's not it's a task which states have to make preparations for and do it, and there is a lag. Now, I don't think the responsibility for this can be placed on the shoulders of the state governments. It is central government. They should have made this announcement 1 month ago. They should have said, if there's a lockdown, we will increase the allocation. They should have made sure that the grain reached the states in advance, that the state
pick it up,
the grain was there for them to use. So I think the primary responsibility lies on the center. Now, what is clearly the second aspect of this is, of course, the fact that in terms of resource generation, the states have been really hit very hard. They were already reeling under the whole sort of GST regime discriminating against them, the central government not paying them even the dues that they were supposed, they had promised to pay the states, and all of that. Their resource generation capabilities are seriously circumscribed because of the whole change in the taxation systems that have taken place in the sort of last few years. You have a situation where states are actually reeling under a financial a resource crisis, and this includes even states like Kerala, which have been very proactive in dealing with crisis, which have become a model not just for India but actually in the whole world on how to deal with this crisis. You are actually going to be reeling with a serious resource crisis, with an economic crisis. You have very little means to deal with because you just don't have resources that are required to do the kinds of things that need to be done, and the central government is simply not stepping up to the task. You see? So that problem is there. It's going to have a very long-term impact on economic conditions across the states, and unfortunately we have very little to do. The problem here is that there is also the difference between the states that are BJP ruled states and others. And there are a whole bunch of BJP ruled states where basically central government runs its writ. If central government says that bring an ordinance to reform APMC Act, next day Madhya Pradesh brings it, next day UP brings it, next day Haryana brings it, and so on and so forth. So Gujarat brings it. So the point is that these are states which are practically, it passes an order and these guys do it. So any possibility for having a dialogue or some sort of cooperation across the states is also undermined because there are these states which are ruled by BJP governments which basically would not do anything of this kind.
And then, of course, we are not talking about it here, but the whole question of labor reforms and all of that is also making things much, much worse for a whole section of people. Though I know there's been this dispute about whether the grains were rotting or not, the surplus which is there, the Food Corporation of India is not denied that there's a huge surplus of grain. Forget whether it's rotting grain or whether it's good grain. And like you said in your report, strategically it should be released, as you said right in the beginning of the conversation. Coming back to the situation for hunger, because you've said very eloquently in your report, as been said by others, that we are really very high on the global hunger index. We are very low on nutrition. A large number of our people don't have not just enough food, but don't have the right kind of food. So we really should be looking at, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, you're even more susceptible if you don't have proper nutrition. Any sort of health situation is made worse. So looking at FCI and looking at the grain situation, a few words on that, and then I just want a word on the opposition. How do we need to mobilize an opposition on all these issues?
Well, okay.
Whether it is union movement, whether it's civil society who does it, whether it's political, because at the moment it's so fractured and so difficult. Fortunately, because of work like yours and some work of journalists and some channels, the plight of migrant workers and stuff is really shaken up even the middle class. But for it to sustain, we need to organize this opposition. It needs to be organized, it needs to be focused, it needs to be sustained, because we are dealing with a very brute center.
You see, okay, let's first talk about the food and hunger.
Yeah.
One is that, whatever estimates you take, whether it's FAO, IFPRI, whoever, and we've done our own estimates using NSS data, there's no doubt that India is the country with largest number of hungry people.
Yeah.
It's the country where the number of people who do not get to consume enough calories of food just to be able to do their normal functioning is the largest. The absolute number of people who do not eat on a normal day adequate amount of food is largest in this country. There's also clear evidence, despite all the data that have been concealed by the government, there's fairly clear evidence that the food insecurity over the last few years has exacerbated. That things have become worse, and there are many more people. The food insecurity has increased, many more people are hungry, and so on. There are various estimates, and all of them suggest to a worsening of the situation. There is no doubt that things would have become much worse during the period of lockdown. I mean, I don't think any thinking person, anybody who's reading the newspapers, has any doubt. You know, you've had hundreds of people dying out of hunger, out of economic distress, committing suicide because they could not feed their children, dying because they were insecure about access to food and started walking towards their villages and dying in accidents, being crushed by trains and whatnot. So, you know, there is no doubt that food insecurity has been exacerbated very significantly during this lockdown. We have some data about it. We don't have a lot of data. We don't have the kind of data we would like to have, simply because for various reasons, generation of that data has not happened. This now, in that situation, given that the Food Corporation of India and Government of India is sitting on a very large stock of food grain, would have been a silver line. This would have been one thing that you could have used. You have actually been wasting money on preserving this grain because you are not distributing.
And this is taxpayers' money, you know. This is not
So taxpayers' money is being spent for not distributing the grain. For not distributing the grain, and to ensure that the grain is not destroyed, you are, for year after year, you are just holding on to the grain, spending money on preserving it because you are not unwilling to distribute it. If this is one case, you know, you could argue that if NREG has to be expanded, government has to raise the resources. Where will government get money from?
Yeah.
Here you have a situation where if you distribute it, you would save money. You are spending money on preserving this grain. If you just said, okay, we're going to just open the granaries and give it for free, you would save money. There is no argument for not distributing this grain. You are sitting on, you know, some 500, 600,000, 600 lakh crores of excess food stock beyond what you need for your strategic reserves. The buffer stock norms, you're sitting on a massive mountain of stock, grain, over and above what you need for all exigencies. And what can be a more bigger crisis than what we are going through? Okay, but even if you keep that part of the grain aside, you are still talking of, you know, hundreds of lakhs of tons of grain, which is sitting in your granaries. You're spending on preserving it, but you're not distributing it. So that's a criminal thing to do. You know, there's been a lot of controversy about whether how much grain is rotting or not. There's no point getting into that. You know, I mean, not all the data are made public. One makes estimates based on what is available, and so on. But you know, I mean, if you're going to tell me that no grains are rotting in godowns of Food Corporation of India, I don't think anybody is going to believe that.
Absolutely. And nobody is disputing that we have a huge surplus anyway.
But yeah, nobody is disputing that there is a huge surplus. What is the argument for you to not just give it to people, to feed them? You see, so there is, you know, that's really something that requires an answer, and it's an answer that people have to ask. You see, and that brings me to your second question.
Yeah.
What is to be done? You see, I really think that two things. One is that you know, the anger that is simmering in among the working people of this country is going to come out. You know,
You believe that?
I believe it. I mean, there's no two way about it. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, if it doesn't come out, I don't know what to make of this world, But the point is that you are sitting on something where something so seriously criminal has happened, in terms of depriving people of their livelihoods, in terms of depriving people of that. I don't know
Sorry,
where.
just repeat that again.
I'm saying that something so serious has happened in terms of depriving people of their livelihoods and in terms of depriving people of their bread. That if we can't, hold this government accountable for this, then I don't know where this country would go. So the question is that would the point is that would these questions be asked? You see, and I think there is no two way about it. You just have to ask these questions, and I do see that something of that kind is happening. If you look at the last couple of weeks, various protests by workers, by Kisans have happened, where people have, maintaining some, physical distancing and so on. But people have come out to the offices of the block development officers or district collectorates and so on, and at least done some protests. So, I do think that people are coming out, but, all these millions of people who walk back home, they have to be mobilized. They have to be told that this is not your fate.
Yeah.
You have to ask the question, why were you made to go through this?
Yeah.
And you have to make somebody give an answer to that question.
And who is responsible?
You cannot accept this to be your fate. You cannot say that मैं तो गरीब हूँ, मेरी किस्मत में ये है.
Yeah.
This is not your kismat. Okay, this is somebody is doing, and that person should be called to answer. So I see that there is no other way about it. There is somebody has to answer for this, and that can only happen if there is large-scale mobilization where people stand up and speak up. You see, if you're going to have opening up of malls, if you're going to have opening up of mandis, if you're going to have opening up of markets, if you're going to have opening up of temples and mosques and churches, there is no reason why people should come out and protest on this street. You see, so I do hope that that glorious protests that we were seeing before this lockdown would sort of gather momentum again and perhaps become bigger in the days to come and force this government to give answers.
I just want to end by saying one thing, if you don't mind, is that as a journalist come activist, I just want to just hats off to you for the kind of journalistic work. I mean, apart from anything else, I think that in a day when one is seeing a paucity of this kind of work coming out from the journalistic arena, to have material like this being put together.
It's also a social responsibility. I think I don't know how I would have looked at myself if at a time like this I had not done what I had done.
Right. It's an amazing piece of work, and I think that regardless of where people are in the political spectrum, left, center, or right, I think it must be read because it's based on just hard data. Even if you have disagreements on, I think this is a moment for India's left. It's a real moment of challenge for India's left, the wider, and I don't think we could get a better moment than this. I don't know what will happen with it, but because it's just been just unspeakable misery on the ground, which all of us have seen and we continue to see. We've been tracking some of these migrant stories back home because of the work that CJP did with migrant workers in Mumbai, which was very little. All we could do was give ration, but we did it with a lot of humility. And we've been tracking their stories back home. And I can't even begin to tell you, I mean, the kind of work that the India's Villages Under COVID series has done and your report has done. I just hope that policymakers look at it very, very seriously, because it's a moment of reckoning for India. It's a real moment of reckoning for India and where India and Indian politics. Sorry, Vikas, we lost you. But I was just saying it's a moment of reckoning for India, really, and where Indian politics and social movements will go. And like you were saying, we just can't afford to lose this moment, because it's just, I think it's possibly opened up our eyes to schisms that were already there, very, very clearly there. But I think that the callousness with which the system dealt with them It's just unforgivable. So I think for the political opposition, this is really a moment of reckoning.
Yeah.
Just a few last words from you, if you want to say something.
Well, I think I've spoken a lot. No.
I'm just
But no, yeah, no, I agree with you. This is absolutely a moment like never before. I also think that, I in fact been asking this question to a lot of my friends and peers and colleagues. I mean, particularly those who are senior to me in age. Have you ever seen anything like this? And I have not met one person yet who said yes. In the 1960s, the food crisis, nothing like this. I mean, what we are seeing today is something that's actually is surely is something for me in my lifetime is not something that I've seen, and it's something that is not something that I can ever forget. So I just think that this is the moment when we have to all decide where you want to be. What role you want to play in this country and in this society. What's your responsibility.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Tista.